Hi there, welcome to On Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits, and this is a little weekly podcast where I do my best to answer some of your questions. Today I am wearing the traveler hat. Oh, there was a piece of yarn on there. No, there wasn't. It was actually just a little focus box on my screen, but that's neither here nor there. This is the traveler hat, so I just released it this week, and I'm so excited because this hat's extra special since it will be the hat we knit for the Spring Knit Along Challenge. So next weekend, starting Thursday, is our 7th annual Spring Knit Along Challenge. It all started with the Harlow hat, which was my take on the most perfect, like brioche, simple toque or beanie, if you will. And I released it, and just on a whim, I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we all just tried to bust one of these out over this weekend? I mean, it was a spur of the moment thing, but it was so much fun. So the next year I was like, let's do it again. So here we are 7 years later. We do a hat in the spring, and then I do another one of these knit along challenges in the fall. So if you are new to the knit along challenge, let me just take a little sip of my coffee here and I'll tell you all about it. Hopefully you have something to enjoy as well. So knit along challenge. All we do is we try to knit the pattern within a short amount of time. So typically it's over a long weekend, about 4 days. I'm thinking the fall one has like a little bit of extra time. The fall one, it just shifts a little because we cast on in the evening. So maybe there isn't, anyways, who cares? It's neither here nor there. But it is a knit along where we try our darndest to knit either a hat in the spring, socks in the fall, and we try to do it in a weekend all together. The challenge aspect is just for fun. There is no pressure. If you don't like having to try and bust out a hat or a pair of socks in a weekend, by all means, you can still join in and knit at your own pace and just enjoy the camaraderie and making friendships. That's really what it's all about. I've said it here many times before, but I met one of my nearest and dearest friends through a knit along on Ravelry 10 years ago. And so I just have a special place in my heart for knit alongs, and really the point of them is it's a space to gather, to get tips and from people, to check out what yarn other people are using, learn new techniques. It's just a fun space to connect with other people who are knitting something similar. So you don't have to make it a challenge, but here's what I will say about the challenge aspect. What I love about these little challenges is one of the questions we've gotten a few times, and I have answered it in different ways, but when we are in a knitting slump, how do you get out of your knitting slump? And I think that this is one of those perfect opportunities because it pushes you to cast on something small and bust it out and bind it off, and you feel accomplished. And a lot of times it reinvigorates our passion for this craft, that we're like, okay, I just needed to like do something. I had to dust off my needles and knit something up and actually finish the project to kind of re-inspire our motivation for our craft. So I love that aspect for it as well. Again, this year is the traveler hat. So I've already knit 3 of these, but I am still planning to join. Last year, I think, was the first year that I was able to actually join with everyone to knit it. Usually I'm just in there moderating and hanging out, creating the space for everyone else, right? But last year we used one of my older patterns, and I actually got in there and knit my own, messed up and had to tear back a whole bunch in brioche. If you follow me on Instagram, you may have seen my video of me tearing it back. But it was so much fun to actually like really get a chance to participate myself as a fellow knitter. So I am hoping to participate again this year, and I think I might even use a little of my hand spun because I've already knit 3 of these bad boys in the recommended yarn, and I thought it would be fun to pull out some of, you can see the open bin behind me. What you can't see is the like 6 bags of yarn that are now spread out. I've been doing a lot of spinning. I got to crank out some projects with this hand spun yarn. So I also had an idea for a shawl that popped into my mind yesterday while I was finishing up a sweater, which I actually just bound off today. I'm feeling very accomplished. It is currently wet blocking. That sweater's coming in June. It's already in testing, but I wanted to knit a second one because that's just who I am. And this one's a little bit different than the first. I wanted to play with some ideas, so I can't wait to try it on once it's dry. Anyways, as I was finishing it up, I had this like boop little spark of inspiration for a new shawl idea. And I might dig into my hand spun to start playing with that idea too. Anyways, back to the traveler hat. As I mentioned, I have knit 3. You know what I love in life is when a project blocks out like this, where it's like, it's even pretty just flat. Like, that's why I like my sock blockers. I don't do it every time that I wash my socks. There's just no way. But especially the first time I'm blocking a pair of freshly knit socks, I love just seeing them in that nice shape. So anyways, here are my 2 other traveler hats. This was the first, oh no, this was my first one. I actually started with it in worsted weight. So this is Brooklyn Tweed Shelter, and this colorway is Pollen, and I really need a sweater in this color because it is that yellow that just like be still my heart. I love it. So numero uno. And then for the second one, I am also think I need a sweater in this color. I like it with my eye color. I don't really have, I'm always drawn to this color, but I don't think I have anything in my wardrobe outside of maybe like a denim jacket that's a similar, a little bit darker than this. But anyways, I love it so much. If you know much about Brooklyn Tweed, then you may know that their dye house closed down Jeepers. It was a couple years ago now. They were flooded by a hurricane here on the East Coast. And ever since then, the production was paused on Brooklyn Tweed's core line of heathers. And it has been tough to find a new dye house, but they have, and their heathers are finally coming back. I mean, silver lining was they started doing some of these amazing, more soft, oh, I almost dropped it in my coffee. That would have been so sad. But they came out with some of these amazing, more just solid colors like Pollen. They have a few, there is a red and a blue that's kind of like this, actually. Now that I'm thinking of it. Anyways, I love these colors. So this is tartan. I do not think tartan is quite back in stock yet, but definitely check out their heathers because they are rolling back in. And this one is Snowbound. Snowbound I have used for a few projects. It is that classic, perfect, cool toned silver gray that I love. And I forget that I like gray. You know, I am such a color person. I'm like, give me all the colors. And it's been fun knitting with some more gray lately. I feel like I'm the antithesis to most other people who want all the grays, but I'm really enjoying it. Wow, I haven't even answered a question yet, and we are almost 10 minutes in, so I'm gonna focus in. But yes, please join us. You can find the pattern on my website and in my Ravelry shop. Of course, I'll link them below. It comes in 5 sizes, baby through adult, and 2 different yarn weights. So you can knit it up in fingering or worsted. And I even had a tester who knit it up in sport and it worked out great. So if you can get gauge and you like the fabric, that's an option too. You can definitely check out their projects on Instagram if you follow the hashtag DRK Traveler Hat, or Ravelry. There's always project pages to check out too. So the knit along will begin Thursdays when we're going to cast on, and we are going to try and bind off by noon Eastern Standard Time on Monday. And I've got some fun prizes and it's just a good time. So I hope that you will join us. And now let's finally dig into some questions. Fortifying sip of my coffee here. Okay, I recently finished the Nurtured sweater. I used a Malabrigo superwash yarn and took that into account when knitting the sweater. After blocking, the fit is great, except the sleeves grew 6 inches in length. I thought, easy fix, until I remembered the sleeves were knitted starting with the cuff and then knitted in with the yoke. I'm not deconstructing the sweater to fix the sleeves. Is there any other solution? Okay, so solution number 1, and what I might recommend you start with, it does sound that you're going to need to get some length off of those sleeves, but the first thing I would do is reblock that sweater. That is really common. It is crazy how much sleeves can grow, and it's not equal. There's something about that smaller tube that just wants to grow. I've seen it happen too, and especially since you used a superwash yarn, that can happen. But that is a lot of growth, which also means that your sleeves narrowed out. So what I would do is reblock that sweater, at the very least steam block to the point where your sleeves are fairly saturated. And then you're going to take each sleeve and you're going to pull them out widthwise like this, all the way down, gently tugging that width back out. Keep an eye on it. Make sure it's not getting wider than you want, but you might be surprised how much you can manipulate that sleeve back up to the length it's meant to be. You might not be able to shave off 6 inches, but that is where I would start, so you can see, okay, was this a blocking issue or is this a permanent issue that I have got to get in there with a pair of scissors and fix? So that's the first thing I would do, especially because future blockings, what you don't want to do is go in there right now, try to reverse engineer by pulling out from the cuff, even though that's where you cast on. Do all that, shorten them, and then you block it after wearing it, and oh, now my sleeves are too short or they're too snug because they were pulled this way, so that tube got smaller. So again, like that fabric's coming from somewhere. And so those sleeves are probably slimmer than what was intended. So reblock, then let's really make sure you decide, okay, how much length do I want to take off of here? And what I would do is snip into the cuff and unravel from the cuff. It is a little bit awkward because you're going to be going into, the trickiest part is going to be going into that stitch pattern. So what I would probably do is snip into the cuff. I'm trying to remember how long the cuff isn't very long on that. I think it's only like an inch, maybe. I remember it being on the shorter side. So I would snip into it, unravel a couple rows, and then stick it onto a needle, and then I would unknit once you get to that stitch pattern. If you're brave, you feel like you really understand the structure of that stitch pattern, you could continue to unravel, but it's just going to make it a little trickier to get your needle back in and not have any whoopsies and maybe have to unravel further than you want, because what we want to avoid here is you having to reknit any of that textured stitch pattern when you go to do the cuff. Ideally, what we're going to do is snip, unravel a row or two, get your needle back in there, unknit to your desired length minus the cuff. So let's say, I'm going to throw out a really random number here, but let's say you want the finished sleeve to be 17 inches, and right now it's sitting off somewhere at like 20 inches, 24, whatever it's at. I just bounced around from like 3 inches too long to 7 inches too long, but I digress. So decide exactly what you want that sleeve length to be. So let's say it's 17 inches and that cuff is an inch. That means you need to get the textured part so that it is 16 inches long from your underarm. So whatever that number is for you, because what we want it to be is once you get to that point, all you're going to do is put in your ribbing needle and immediately knit the cuff and then bind off. We just don't want you messing with that textured stitch pattern if you can avoid it, because you're going in the wrong direction and it's gonna make it funky if you try to have to add on a few more rows of that. So that is how I would fix it if you do need to do some sweater surgery. But you can do it. It's worth it. It's worth it to have the sweater you want. Otherwise, you would have to basically undo the yoke, shorten your sleeves, reattach and reknit the yoke. You're not going to be reknitting the whole sweater, but if you don't feel comfortable with the sweater surgery and you don't feel like you can fix it with a new blocking, then that would be the safe option, would be to unravel your yoke until that sleeve came on. I want to say sleeve, the yoke separation, but we're going bottom up. But you technically could unravel to there, pop off the sleeves, take out some of that, reattach, and then go from there. But I wouldn't, because you're happy with the fit, and unraveling those sleeves, depending on how far you need to unravel, you also might mess with your stitch count. So I think my first two ideas are the best ideas, because we don't really want to mess with the stitch count of where you attached. We want your sleeves to have that many stitches. And if you start tearing back to make them shorter, well, now your stitch count's going to be off, because you're going to be missing some of those increases you had put in there. So yeah, I'd go the first two options. Best of luck. Just go slow, put on some soothing music. You got this. Question number 2, how in the world do you spin thicker? I started and continue to spin lace weight, so thin that sometimes it easily breaks. I can't spin thicker on my support spindle, and I don't get it. So part of it might be your fiber prep. Keyword here that's kind of sticking out to me is support spindle. Are you spinning on anything else or just support spindle? I find that with my support spindle, it is a bit trickier to spin thicker if I don't have my fiber well prepped. So I think that's something that you might need to, that's something to look at. If you're spinning on a wheel, to spin thicker, you do one of two things. If you are spinning a worsted drafting style, like your, I'm like caterpillar, inch, it's something like that, but I can't remember. Oh my gosh. Anyways, if you're doing a worsted draft where you're kind of pinch like this, then you pinch more fiber into it as you go. If you are doing long draw, then you are going to let the twist go into more of your fiber supply as you draw back. I think it is easier to control the thickness of what I'm spinning when I'm spinning worsted compared to woolen. Woolen, because you are letting it go into your fiber supply and you're drawing back, it's kind of a, let's hope for the best to an extent, at least for me. So that's why when I see support spindle, I'm like, ooh, I'm guessing that you're probably doing long draw or supported long draw, and you might need a fiber prep that helps kind of grab more of that fiber as you're drawing. The thing is you can only ever get it to spin so fast. You can only add so much twist on a support spindle. So sometimes it's easier to crank up how much twist we're adding on a wheel. So on a wheel, it's a little bit easier to adjust things like that to help there be more twist to grab more of the fibers as you're drawing back compared to a support spindle. But that is what I would recommend, is playing around with your fiber preps and see if that helps. And otherwise, you can, even if you spin fine, you can get a thicker yarn by adding more plies. So my default is a 3-ply. I love a 3-ply yarn. And you might be surprised, I'm not sure how long you've been spinning, how much yarn you've finished, but you might be surprised by how much that yarn puffs and creates maybe a heavier weight than you think it's going to. I have done some where I thought maybe I was gonna end up with like a sport, and I'm sitting at a heavy DK. So by the time it blooms after blocking, actually I'm gonna grab a skein that I was gonna show for show and tell. So when this yarn was freshly plied, I just finished this skein. When it was freshly plied, and before its bath, it was looking like definitely no heavier than a fingering weight. And it's actually probably now, I'm going to guess, a DK. So it changes so much after you wash it. 3-ply. I'll talk more about this later, but yeah, don't be afraid to add more plies. You know, I'm also an intuitive knitter who I don't really want to fight myself. I love to learn new things. I love to adjust my technique, especially if it's better for my body. But at the same time, spinning is my relaxing place and I want it to stay that way. So I might add in another ply instead of kind of battling how thick my single is. But try different drafting styles and different amounts of twist. If your single's breaking, that means there's not enough twist in there, which again, working on a spindle, you can also play with different styles of spindle. You might need one that's a little zoomier that can spin a bit faster to help get more twist in there so that your fiber doesn't draft apart and break. Question number 3. I am planning to spin for a night shawl. Night shift shawl, as well as an attune shawl. I know 2-ply yarns are good for color work and lace, while 3-plies are good for cables and texture. So what yarn structure would you recommend for textured mosaic knits like the Shift series and for brioche? I know the Shift patterns have used both 2-ply and 3-ply and figured I'd go right to the source. So honestly, dealer's choice, whatever you want. I don't have a preference over 2-ply and 3-ply for mosaic and brioche. Honestly, I think both work great. I think if you want guidance and you're having a little trouble deciding, then I would stick with the pattern. I would go with your night shift. If you're spinning for both, I would spin a 3-ply for night shift. That way you're sticking with what that yarn was. You can, if you want to try to more closely mimic the actual commercial yarn that was used. And then for a tuned shawl, that one I think I did do in 2 yarn weights because I did a commercial one and a hand spun one. I'm trying, my memory is like, what did I do? I think there was a mix of between fingering and DK for my 2 samples. There's some wiggle room with yarn weights on that one. It's one of the reasons why it's so great for hand spun. But that one, I would try using a 2-ply. So I would just do both if I were you. And then you can also decide, what do you prefer after you've worked with them? And kind of take those notes and see what you think. Might also depend on the braid you want to spin up, or do you want to do a combo spin? A lot of times, depending on how much yardage I want to get and what I'm spinning for, that might have a factor in whether or not I do a 2 or a 3-ply. If I want to push it so that I have more yardage at the end, I might do a 3-ply because I can use 3 braids and now I'm spinning up 12 ounces instead of just 8 ounces for a 2-ply. So you can let things like that kind of help push you one way or the other. But as far as what will knit up better in those patterns, either one, you'll be totally fine. So let your heart lead you. What one would bring you more joy? All right, this is a brioche question. Hi, Andrea. I love brioche, but have discovered a consistency problem when I knit brioche flat, such as for the Feel Good shawl. Knitting flat causes my knit stitches on the right side to change size on alternate rows. Larger when they've been created from the purl, wrong side, smaller when created on the knit, right side. It's a bit like rowing out, though I've never had an issue with rowing out in stockinette. Could it be more to do with the yarn over, which seems to be longer when purled than when knit, therefore creating a looser stitch? On the money. Am I doing something wrong? No. What do you think? Can you suggest ways to overcome? So, you 100% nailed it on the head. Nailed it on the head? Hit it on the nail? You got it. It is that we yarn over differently depending if it's following a knit or a purl. So you are rowing out. That is what that is. It's just the brioche version of it. So what I would recommend doing is 2 different needle tips. It's going to be the easiest, I think, I was just thinking about 2-color brioche. And my ooh, this is one of those ones where I almost need to have a little swatch, because what I'm thinking about is the fact that you are going to be doing a knit pass, a purl pass, and then a purl pass, and then a knit pass. So what I would actually probably do is have 2 needles, 2 sets of circulars. And what I'm trying to decide is, I think I can see it in my brain. So you just need to go down a needle size on your burp rows. And that's why I would use 2 different needles. I would definitely use a row counter or something to help you keep track to make sure that you're switching it up. Because what you're going to do is, so let's say you're using 7 and a 6. 7 for your knit rows, a 6 for your purl rows. And so you would use the 7 using your bigger one, switch to your smaller needle, purl across, stay with the smaller needle to do your next purl row when you turn, because that's what it's going to start with. Then switch back to your small needle, do your knit pass, turn, stay with that needle to knit again. That's what it's going to be. That's going to be its rhythm. But that's what I would do, is I would just use 2 needles, so that you have a big one and a little one, and you're going to use the little needle. And hopefully I said that right when I was just saying the instructions, but you're always going to use the little needle for your purl passes and always use your big one for your knit passes. And I think that's going to be the easiest way to remedy that situation. There are different ways to wrap a yarn over, which might be great for you. The reason sometimes I hesitate with that tip is, depending on how you wrap your yarn over, it can influence how you then have to work that stitch. So if you wrap your yarn over a certain way, you might then need to go in at a different angle to work that stitch next time you need to wrap it. So I just don't want you then twisting stitches and not understanding what's going on. So that might be try it out if you want. And if you feel really, really comfortable with the structure of that fabric, that is an option to play around with how you're wrapping your yarn over to try and tighten it up a little bit. You could wrap those purl yarn overs differently. But yeah, that would almost take a tutorial video to kind of show that working out. So the easiest fix would just be to use 2 needles, 1 a size down for your purl passes. All right, question number 5. I have a question about gauge for bottom up sweaters. I rarely can get perfect stitch and row gauge. Typically, I focus on matching stitch gauge rather than row gauge when I'm knitting top down. Because of how row gauge is off, I can just knit to my desired yoke depth and length. However, knitting bottom up has been a problem for me because if my row gauge is too small, the yoke of the sweater is too shallow. If I knit according to the pattern for the yoke when my row gauge is off, I don't know how much extra depth to add to the yoke until I'm finished. I don't want to rip out the whole thing to add an inch at the bottom of the yoke. Should I prioritize row gauge for bottom up sweaters? Any tips for making gauge work on a bottom up sweater where I don't have the option to knit to desired yoke depth before splitting for sleeves? So yeah, it actually just takes a little bit of math. So you definitely want to do a decent size swatch that you have wet blocked and knit ideally in the round, because pretty much all yoke sweaters are knit in the round. So you just want to have the truest idea of your gauge as possible to be able to figure this out. So go ahead, do your swatch, block it, let it dry, and figure out your row gauge. So this might be a pen and pencil moment for me, so I don't lose my track as I'm describing it. All right, so you're gonna wanna look at your schematic. And your schematic, or it might be written in the pattern, but somewhere in that pattern, hopefully the yoke depth is listed. So either on the schematic page, or sometimes, although that's more, For a bottom up, I'm gonna guess it's gonna be on the schematic. Sometimes when patterns are knit from the top down and they say, continue knitting until the yoke measures blah, blah, blah inches and centimeters, then they don't really need to repeat that in the schematic necessarily. So, but for bottom up, I would assume you're gonna find it in a schematic. So let's say that your yoke depth should be 8 inches. And it sounds like your issue is generally that your row gauge is a little bit shorter than what you need it to be, meaning that you have more rows per inch than what the pattern has. So let's say that the pattern, I'm just going to do some real easy math here, and we're going to say that they say there is 8 rows per inch is their gauge, but you got 10 rows per 1 inch. And you need to equal 8 inches. Well, that means that they would get 64 rows would be 8 inches for their gauge, but that is not going to be the same for you. So you, at 10 rows per inch, you're going to need 80 rows to get that same length. So that's the math you basically want to figure out. You need to know your yoke depth, even if it's just the yoke depth you like. So figure out the yoke depth for that sweater that they're calling for. Look at your row gauge, figure out how many rows per inch, and then just divide that yoke depth by your row gauge per inch so you know how many rows you need to work. And then go look at the pattern. Let's say, okay, they have a yoke chart and it's 64 rows long. Okay, well, you know that's going to be too shallow for you. You're missing like at least 1.5 inches with that. And so you would want to figure out, okay, again, if we went with my sample here of 10 rows gives you 1 inch. Okay, well, you need 80 rows. So you need to just knit 16 plain rows or rounds before you even start that chart. And that's going to help give you that extra bit of depth. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Here's my doodle. So figure out the yoke depth, figure out your row gauge so you know how many rows do you need to knit to get that depth. And then that should help you figure out how many extra rows you need to work before you start the chart or whatever else is going on in that yoke. I hope that helps. All right. Oh, I did a little bonus question because this was a quickie. Maybe not a quickie, but one that I wanted to answer. I don't remember. I picked these yesterday. So a lot happens in 24 hours in my brain. Okay. Because of you, I'm learning to spin on an e-spinner and supported spindles. Yay! You have a lot to answer for. My question is, please, how do you join your spindle spins so that they are continuous? Do you spit splice when you ply? I love the mega skeins you produce and wondered how you do it. So I don't spit splice when you are joining. So as I've shown here many times, I have these little bobbins from my spindles. And when I ply those up into one big skein, literally all I do is I try not to run out of a single at the same time. Like ideally, I want to only be adding in one new single at a time to however many I'm plying together. But all I do is tuck the little tail of the one I'm going to join up with the other plies that are already there. So I like to leave at least 1 inch where the one that's about to run out overlaps with the new one I'm joining. And I just tuck it in and then let the spin eat it up. I wish I had a sample and I could just show you a little overhead camera right now. But basically imagine you are holding, let's kind of pretend that this, here we go, and see how like this one's running out and pretend like that one's my one that's gonna keep going. And I literally, here's my tail. So I literally would just take my new one and hold it together. And then as it spins, this twist, hey, look at that. The twist will just eat it up. And then now I have my two, boop-a-doo. And now I would just keep going. That makes sense? So you're basically just sticking the new single right in between the old and the other one that's still there, and then just let the twist and it right up. You could splice them if you wanted to, but you don't need to. It'll be pretty secure. I've never once in any of my finished skeins seen where I have joined in my new single as one runs out. So once you do it, it'll all click. Okay, I think that's it. Again, next weekend is the 7th annual hat challenge, spring knit along hat challenge. We are also coming to a close on the DRK March to May knit along. I cannot believe it. We still have the Traveler Spin It to Knit It knit along going on, and the 100-day knitting challenge and the 100-day long door challenge. We have a lot going on. No wonder I'm so scatterbrained. So this week, well, I showed you my combo spins last week. They were still damp, but you did get to see them. So in the meantime, I also showed you how I was doing my combo draft spin that was inspired by Kim McKenna and Jillian Moreno. And so I had stripped down my braid into all these little strips, and then I held 2 together at a time that created like a very barber pulled effect with fast color changes. And then I turned that into a 3-ply, and this is the result. So fun. I wonder if I can get some light on there. Ooh la la, ooh la la. So that is my accomplishment this week, and I love it. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just so much yarn, so it'd be too much just for a hat. I'm not sure how much. I haven't done the specs, but anyways, pretty excited about it. So there we go. We've got a new pattern out in the world. I've made some new yarn. We've got new knit alongs coming. We've got old ones ending. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I hope that you have the loveliest of weekends. I hope you get to make something. And if you want to ask a question, links below in the show notes, along with, I always link any pattern or anything I talk about. I try to remember to throw a link below for you. But I hope that you have a beautiful day. Thanks for spending some time with me, and I hope to see you back here next week. Bye.